Hello everyone, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink, and today I have a 2-for-1. I'm going to make 2 cards at once using the My Favorite Things. This is the Roses All Over background stamp. And I pulled out 2 pieces of the Tim Holtz Distress watercolor cardstock that's already cut to A2 size. So it's 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. And I have the smooth side facing up right now, and I am coating it with my anti-static powder tool. And then I'm going to ink up this stamp with Versamark ink, which is just a clear, very sticky, slow drying ink. So I've inked up the stamp, and then I'm going to press that watercolor paper, each piece down onto the stamp and inking up between each pressing. So I'm just laying that smooth side down onto the stamp, and then I used some scrap paper so I could really press that image into the watercolor paper. And before I go on to stamp the second one, I'm going to coat this with some white embossing powder over a coffee filter. And even though I use the coffee filter to kind of contain the powder, I still ended up getting it absolutely everywhere. But when you're doing like embossing large areas like this, it's kind of inevitable. But I just do 1/2 kind of at a time, trying to hold just the very edges because I didn't want to smear anything. And then I'm going to heat with my heat tool right until the embossing powder melts. I've had a lot of people asking me about that with warping with cardstock, because usually I don't get a whole lot of warping. It's more susceptible to doing something like this when you are embossing the entire piece of watercolor paper. It does warp a bit, but moving your heat tool around and moving it away from the area you just embossed so you're not overheating areas, that tends to help. I don't worry about it too much because like with this, I'm planning on taping it all down and then I'm going to die cut it later. So yeah, the warping doesn't really bother me. But before I get to that, I funnel the embossing powder back into the container from the coffee filter because otherwise I'm going to knock it over. And I've got both pieces embossed, and now I'm going to tape them down. This is a masonite board. I showed this in the last video I did with 2 cards and watercoloring. I'm pretty sure I used the masonite board. Just a hard surface that I'm able to tape these down to with some painter's tape. And I tried really hard to tape just the very, very edge of these. Because these are A2 size, I wanted to preserve almost all of the entire panel. And I had the tape on as little as possible, yet enough to hold down all of the edges. And then I have my little makeshift palette here, which is just copy paper with a piece of clear acetate over top. I mentioned in the previous video, what you can do is take a piece of white cardstock and either laminate it if you have a laminator, or get it laminated at any local like copy store type place. It's on my to-do list, I just haven't got to it yet. But for me, this works, and I'm going to use Distress inks to smush onto here, and just having it over the white cardstock just makes it so much easier to see the colors. And this is something you can do if you're not sure how colors are going to blend together. With this specific combo, I knew how it would look, but I'm actually going to use this later on with these cards. So I just took another piece of the same watercolor paper, and I applied the colors just like I'm planning to apply onto the front of the first card. So I got the cardstock wet with some just clean water, and then applied the different colors with a brush, and then set that aside to dry. So I'm going to do the exact same thing to the first panel here. Is I'm just getting it really wet with clean water. Like I used a lot of water for this, just because I really wanted the colors to blend and to kind of move into each other. And I started with the lightest, which was the spun sugar, and then I used picked raspberry distress ink and festive berries, and I mixed some of the colors together to get them to blend. I only applied it to the lower, I'd say maybe like 2/3. I kind of wanted it to fade off into white. That's kind of just the mental image I had in my head. Yeah, so I kind of went back and forth here and there, kind of saturated the little panel a little bit more. And because I'm a very impatient person, I did dry this with my heat tool. And again, I'm going to show in a little bit the actual difference. There's a reason why a lot of more, I guess, artist types in the papercraft world, when they say like if you let it air dry, you get a totally different look. And I can actually show that to you in a couple minutes. But yeah, with this, it's not as big of a deal, but you'll see with an actual basically watercolor background how big a difference it makes letting it air dry versus speeding up that process with a heat tool. So for my second card, I wanted to do more of a rainbow theme. I love like the rainbow kind of color scheme together, especially on like a stark white background. So to achieve that, the easiest way to achieve that is just use 3 primary colors. So red, yellow, blue. And in this case, I used the Squeezed Lemonade, Salty Ocean, and the Festive Berries again for this one. And I started with the yellow, which was the Squeezed Lemonade, since that was my lightest color. And then I applied the Festive Berries and then the Salty Ocean. And then I kind of let the colors mix and mingle in between to create kind of an orange and then kind of a green. And went back and forth a little bit. I didn't want to drag the colors into each other too much, because if, the red started mixing with the greens and the blues, it could get messy. So I kind of let them do their own thing, and then again sped up the process with my heat tool because I get way too impatient. I have a really hard time letting things air dry. And again, you're going to see there's a good reason for this. But here you can see the part on the right with the more rainbow colors, I sped up with my heat tool, and look at the effect it created. Whereas the one on the left, I had let sit and air dry. So it makes a huge difference. And here's where the big mistake happened. You want to make sure your piece is completely dry before you peel the tape off. And I learned that right here. I ripped this pink piece, and it's a good thing I do voiceovers because I said a really bad word when I did it. Because I was like, oh my gosh, I plan on using this whole panel, and I was like so frustrated with myself. And I wasn't going to include this, but I thought I actually was able to salvage it, so I decided to include it. But what I just did was I grabbed my multi-medium matte adhesive, which dries matte, not glossy, and I applied adhesive right to that ripped piece and then pressed it back into the cardstock. And with the heat embossing, the watercoloring that's going on, you honestly cannot see that at all. So I was so glad I didn't completely ruin it and I caught it before I really ripped that piece. But again, lesson learned, make sure whatever you've watercolored is completely dry before you peel off the tape, because the cardstock, when it is wet, it is compromised. The fibers are not as held together. They're loose, so it can shred. But yeah, the multi-medium matte saved it, and then also putting it through the die cut machine. Whether I die cut it or not, I would actually have just ran it through my machine without a die if I'd wanted to, because that pressure presses it completely flat as well. So it pressed that ripped piece back into the cardstock even more, and you honestly cannot tell where that happened. Like, I have the card sitting in front of me and you can't tell, so I was so glad I was able to fix it. So I used the largest die from My Favorite Things Blueprints Dynamics 1 set and ran both of those through with that die just to cut off those edges that had been taped down. And then I used these like scrap basically of watercolor pieces that I'd created, and I just ran them through with one of the new Stitched Heart Stacks Dynamics. So die cut both of those pieces and then set those aside. And since I had my big shot out, I thought I might as well get all the die cutting done at once. So I'm using the Love die. This is from the Peace Love Joy Dynamics, and I actually die cut it multiple times. I die cut it 6 times from white cardstock. And then as my last bit of die cutting, I had a scrap of black cardstock. I always keep all my scraps, especially now with the amount of die cutting I do. I keep even like really small scraps because you can always die cut little hearts, stars, all kinds of things. There's always little embellishments. So yeah, this just random scrap of black cardstock was the perfect size for this little fishtail flag die. This is from the My Favorite Things Sentiment Strips Dynamics. And same thing, ran that through my machine twice to die cut 2 of those from the black cardstock. And then get everything set aside. And these 6 Love die cuts, I'm going to adhere 3 each together. And this is where I'm using my multi-medium matte again. I absolutely love this adhesive. I think I rave about it in pretty much every video, but I really, really do. It gives you a few seconds wiggle time so you can get things lined up. You know, it doesn't adhere immediately, but then once it adheres for good. And because it dries matte, you don't have a mess going on. If you do smear it, or apply a little bit too much and it oozes out the edge, with it drying matte, it's just wonderful, wonderful. And that fine tip applicator, I've been using it for months now, and I've never had a problem with it. The rare times it does get a little clogged, I just take a needle and pop it right in there, and it's good to go. But it's pretty rare it gets clogged up. So anywho, I'm using my favorite things. This is the Love You More stamp set. This was in their January release. And I grabbed 2 different sentiments from the set, and I coated those black die cut pieces with the same anti-static powder I used in the beginning. And with both these stamps, I'm sorry, my head totally gets in the way here. I only inked up part of the sentiment. I didn't ink up the word love. And but because it's a brand new stamp, it's still kind of stamped a little bit, even though I didn't ink it up. So I just made sure to kind of rub that off a little bit with my finger, and then applied more of the anti-static powder because I didn't want the embossing powder to stick to the word love on there, just the rest of it. So the one die cut says you more, because it was supposed to be love you more, but I removed the love. And then the second one says is me and you. So stamped both those with Versamark, coated them with the same white embossing powder, and then melted both with my heat tool. Once they are melted, I let them sit for just a few seconds to cool off, and then I used just my fingers to rub across both those die cuts to remove all that excess anti-static powder. And then to adhere these to my watercolor panels, I'm going to use some foam tape. And these die cuts are just slightly too narrow to fit a full strip of foam tape. So I just cut it in half with my scissors. So cut it in half and then applied the foam tape to both of these die cuts, and then lined both of the watercolor panels up on my grid mat so that I get these adhered straight, and just let the edges hang off there for a minute. So again, my head kind of gets in the way. So got that done, and then to adhere the actual love die cuts, I'm using the same multi-medium mat, just applying a somewhat generous amount to the back of these, and then I don't show this on video, but I press down and hold them for just a little bit so they adhere really well over all that embossing. So once those are adhered fully in place and they're not going to pop up and the glue's had time to dry, I just flip these over so that I am looking at them from the back, and use my scissors to trim off the pieces of the black die cuts that were kind of hanging over the edge, so that I've got a smooth edge on both of these pieces. And then for the card base itself, normally I already have my card bases cut, but since I was doing 2 at once, I decided to use a white card base for both of them. And I just took a full sheet of 8.5 by 11 cardstock, and I'm holding it in landscape orientation, I guess, with the long way across. And I'm scoring the entire sheet at 5.5 inches with just using my paper cutter and the cutting groove there, and my Teflon bone folder. So I scored it at 5.5, and then I turned the cardstock so that I could cut it in half at 4.25 inches, and then I've got 2 card bases done at once. So I just used my bone folder again to press down the creases on both of those, just to give it a crisp crease. And then I thought for a minute about putting both these panels up on some more foam tape, just because I can. Sometimes I do that when things are a little more wonky and the foam tape really holds everything flatter. But these were flattened out really well, 1 from being taped in the beginning, and 2 from running them through my die cut machine. So I just decided to adhere them flat to the card bases with my Tombow Monomulti. And then for those hearts I die cut earlier, this was just dumb luck. I honestly didn't plan this, but both sentiments fit the hearts perfectly. I didn't even think of that. I knew I wanted to stamp sentiments on the hearts, but I didn't have like specific ones in mind. And it just so happened that both these sentiments fit the hearts perfectly. So I actually grabbed my Misty for this because I was a little worried that stamping onto watercolor paper sometimes, especially sentiments, it can be touch and go. Sometimes it works perfectly, sometimes it doesn't. And since I only had one of each of these hearts and really one shot to do this, I pulled out my Misty and lined up both of the hearts, held them down with the magnets, got both of the sentiments positioned perfectly, and then I can open the lid of my Misty and ink up these sentiments with black ink. And of course, this time it did work perfectly, but I give the Misty credit for that. But if it hadn't, I would have been able to ink these up again and stamp them a second time to get a perfect impression if I did actually miss any little parts. So then I wouldn't have wasted these little watercolor die cut hearts I did. So they stamped perfectly. So I was able to get those done and then adhere each one with its coordinating card. I just adhered it on the inside. So it just finishes off the inside. You could even do a card, you know, like this, do a watercolored heart and a stamped sentiment, just a really simple, clean and simple card. It is always another idea. I get a lot of people that say stuff like that, like you could have made 4 cards for the 2 or whatever. But I always like finishing the inside of my card. You always open it up to see what's inside. So I like adding that extra little, you know, some stamping, coloring, embellishing, whatever. So anyway, as a final bit of embellishment, I had to add some Pretty Pink Posh, clear, sparkling. This is the mix sequins. I don't even put these away. I got this little jar, or tiny little, it's a condiment dish out of my kitchen. Yeah, swiped it out of my own kitchen to keep the sequins on my desk at all times because I use them that much. And oh, I just love them. They do sell out a lot, like a lot. So you basically have to jump on them and get them when you get the chance. So I adhered several of those to each card with the same multimedia mat, and that's it. I'm sorry this is such a long video. I did not mean for this video to be so long. If you're still watching, thank you so much for watching and subscribing and thumbs upping my videos. All the supplies and all the info will be linked in the description box below the video. So check that out if you're interested, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.